So welcome to a Mercury Retrograde special podcast episode. This podcast episode is extra special because I'm doing something that I've never done before, and I'm recording it live. So this is a backup recording, the one that will get posted to YouTube, to the podcast, whatever Spotify allows video now. I'm recording that separately. But I also have a Zoom going, and so anybody that signed up in advance was able to come on Zoom, and when I hit stop recording on the podcast on my usual recording software, the folks on Zoom will get to just hang out and chat, and y'all can ask me anything. It's usually pretty fun. I used to offer office hours weekly, and so that's kind of the idea, that's the vibe. But I'm trying something new. And so Mercury's almost retrograde. That's what this podcast is all about. And so I'll be the first to say that I don't think Mercury retrograde, this is probably one of the most common things you'll hear. It's not a time to try new things. I think if anything, this is just how I live my life. It's a great time to try new things because not if, but when the glitches and the kinks happen, they're more likely to happen during Mercury retrograde, which is why most astrologers out there will say, like, don't do anything new. It's a time for reflection. It's a time for kind of peeling back. I take the opposite approach, clearly, here with what I'm doing with this live thing. It was a whole tech setup to have the Zoom going and the recording going, and it's just different than how I usually do things, and that's fine. This is Mercury retrograde, so welcome officially to the Horoscopes podcast. I'm your host, Rosemary Holbrook. I'm a Vedic sidereal astrologer and a yoga therapist, which means I take the Vedic system of astrology, which uses the sidereal zodiac, which is more astronomically accurate than the tropical zodiac, and the whole Vedic system of tools, things like Nakshatras that we're going to talk a lot about today. We're going to talk about the Nakshatras that Mercury is retrograding through. And then, so I not only just tell you about the astrology and the Vedic tools and the Vedic philosophy of the astrology, but then at the end, we'll always have yoga practices and journal prompts to help you best work with the energies. And that is my favorite part. It's really fun for me, and I also hear from a lot of folks that it helps it feel more tangible, because sometimes astrology can be a little bit heady. It can be a little bit cerebral, and so we're trying to bring it down to earth, down into our regular lives, down into our bodies, and so that's why I always end with yoga practices and journal prompts. So stick around for that part, and just a little bit of housekeeping before I launch into all the nitty-gritty details of Mercury retrograde and what all of that means. If you want to come live next week, you'll have to watch out for an email from me. So how I'm doing it is I'm not telling you the link. I'm not like putting it out there. If you're on my email list, which is really easy to get on if you want to be on it, if you're not already on it, you just go to yogiscopes.com. And down at the bottom of the homepage, there's a place to sign up. There's like pop-ups everywhere. I make it easy for you. If you sign up for the birth chart decoder, that automatically registers you to my newsletter, things like that. I will send out an email on Friday. So I'll send out an email tomorrow to the folks that came with next week's registration link. Then I'll send out my regular newsletter on Friday that'll have the link to register for next week. So I'm only doing 1 week at a time. And so if you want to come live, make sure you watch out for the email. If you don't care about that, then just tune into the podcast like regular. So here we go. Like I mentioned, I think a moment ago, Mercury's retrograding through sidereal, Leo, and Cancer. And so I'm going to tell you all of the things about it, the dates, the shadow period. So we're already in the shadow period, and I'm going to explain astrologically. Maybe you heard about it was called CrowdStrike glitch. It was a software update. It wasn't like a like malware or a virus or a cybersecurity attack. It was a software update that was estimated to cause over $1 billion worth of like lost business and or like money that people had to spend to like fix issues that this software update caused. And the software update happened overnight during a time while the Mercury retrograde shadow period was beginning, and while Mercury's Gandanta. And so I'm getting ready to explain what all of that means. So let's start with the shadow period. So the shadow period of Mercury retrograde, this is how I calculate it. And so other people might do this differently. I don't really consider shadow periods for any other planets retrogrades because they would kind of like always be in shadow period. Like Saturn spends so long retrograde that it will retrograde back into it retrogrades through the entirety, basically. So the whole time it's not retrograde would be considered shadow period, and that doesn't really make sense. So, but with Mercury retrograde shadow period, we really do start seeing the impacts of Mercury retrograde, which are, as we know, tech glitches, travel delays, traffic jams, and those are all the kind of things we saw with that CrowdStrike glitch that happened. It was like grounding airplanes, like bank softwares weren't working, like all kinds of stuff. And I know already this week it's been like frustrating. Like just nothing seems to be working. My computer's really slow. Everything's really laggy, right? And it is kind of frustrating when you're trying to do something and you just have to wait and watch the little spinny thing. So anyway, the shadow period is marked by, if you look at the degrees, so you look at the degrees where Mercury begins its retrograde and the degree where it ends. And then you calculate, you go back and see, okay, it's retrograding through this section of the sky. The shadow period is when, before the retrograde, Mercury moves into the section that it will then move backwards through, right? And then, so it moves through that section once, and then it moves backwards. That's the retrograde. And then it has to move through that section again and move all the way back through its retrograde space, if that makes sense, right? So it's the time before and after the retrograde where Mercury is moving first through the space that it will move backwards through, and then after it moves direct, moving again forwards through the space that it retrogrades through. So it moves through the space of the sky 3 times, once, and then backwards, and then forwards again, right? And so that's what gives retrogrades the effect that we say it's a good time to, you think RE words, like redo things, re-examine, reorganize, restructure, rethink, right? All of these things that we think of, that's a really good little trick to say, what should I be doing during a retrograde, is I should be re-examining my habits, re-examining my beliefs, maybe reorganizing my kitchen drawers, I don't know, reorganizing my email inbox or your digital files. That's another really good thing to do during Mercury retrograde. And so we start seeing the effects, or like, so Mercury retrograde brings up problems, right? And that's why most astrologers will tell you not to like do new things, not to start new ventures or like sign contracts, because there could be a problem if you do. And I'm just of the mind that like there's probably going to be problems anyway, and Mercury retrograde just highlights the problems that were already there or already were going to be there. And so you just don't want to do anything hasty, right? Like you don't want to sign a contract without reading it. This is the time to read the terms and conditions and to ask questions and things like that. But I wouldn't say avoid signing contracts completely. I would just say don't do it without reading it. This is not the time to do that during Mercury retrograde. And since you know that, you can live your life anyway accordingly. But basically the shadow period is when that begins. And so that's why I think I heard somebody saying like, oh, Mercury's not even retrograde yet and we've had all these issues. Well, it's been in the shadow period. So let me go ahead and tell you the dates of that. The shadow period began July 16th around 11:45 p.m. Eastern. So basically July 17th almost. Eastern time, at least. All the times that I give you will be in Eastern time, which is like New York City time. I always forget if we're on standard or daylight time, EST or EDT. I don't know. We're on New York time. And Anyway, so July 16th, around midnight going into the 17th, is when the shadow period began. And the shadow period will end September 11th, around 7 p.m. Eastern time. So you could really consider that whole time the Mercury retrograde period, but the time that it is actually physically retrograde is a 25-day span between Sunday, August 4th, around 10:12 p.m. Eastern, through Wednesday, August 28th, around 7 p.m. Eastern. 6:58 p.m. is the time I have written down. And so we can basically look at this as levels. Like, for the entire span, including the shadow period, is when we're going to be experiencing whatever issues it is that Mercury retrograde brings up. And then it might get a little bit worse, right? Quote unquote worse, or more prominent, I think is a better way to put that. The issues or things that Mercury retrograde is bringing up might become more prominent during that time between August 4th and August 28th, when it's actually moving backwards from our perspective here on Earth, which is what anything astrologically is. It's all from our perspective, not where the planets physically are in space. I gave a pretty in-depth explanation of that on the immediately previous podcast episode about the full moon in Capricorn, if you want to give that a listen. And on Wednesday, August 21st, is the day that Mercury moves from Leo to Cancer, back to Cancer. And so you might notice that that is a fire sign, Leo, and a water sign, Cancer. And so maybe you know this, that when planets move between water signs and fire signs, in Vedic astrology, we call that the Gandanta zone. And Gandanta means spiritual knot. So when a planet moves through the Gandanta zone, which is defined as the last 3 degrees and 20 minutes of a water sign, which is the last pada of a nakshatra, if you want to get really technical, of a water sign, through the first pada, the first section of a nakshatra, of a fire sign. So basically 26 degrees and 40 minutes of Cancer through 3 degrees and 20 minutes of Leo. So for that little 6-degree section is considered Gandanta, and that happens again at between Scorpio and Sagittarius. Scorpio is a water sign, Sagittarius is a fire sign, and then also between Pisces and Aries. And so what that means is, usually when planets move through the Gandanta zone, what happens is it presents patterns. It presents karmas, really, like spiritual patterns that we see in this life, which often in our brains, how that presents is issues, like things to deal with, right? And as the planet moves through that zone, usually in like the majority of the cases, the planet's not retrograding. So it's just going straight through that zone, right? Through the Gandanta zone. And it is a good time when a planet is Gandanta to release these spiritual knots. And you can think of them as like if you have a knot in a muscle, right? You want to release that. You want it to feel supple and not all knotted up, right? You want it, you want energy to flow freely, so you don't want knots, right? But the way to release knots, often, as in a bungee cord or in a muscle, is not always by yanking on it, right? Sometimes it's more about kind of getting in there and massaging it out and creating some gentleness and some softness and maybe some nervous system regulation, especially in the case of releasing a knot in a muscle, right? So if we're going to release a spiritual knot, which is what the Gandanta zone is, we need to kind of like pay attention to what the issues are, pay attention to where the blockages are, and hopefully when I explain like the nakshatras that this retrograde is happening through, you'll be able to tell maybe more specifically what issues are specifically related to this Mercury retrograde that you might be experiencing. So with this retrograde, and this happens often with Mercury, actually, Mercury kind of frequently retrogrades through the Gandanta zone. It actually did earlier this year, and I think will again. I could be mistaken about that, but I'm almost positive it will again retrograde through that section between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So it's pretty common for Mercury, but it's a good chance to like look at your stuff and work out any issues and choose new patterns, right? So what that means with the retrograde is it's, like I was saying, it's moving forward through the Gandanta zone once, and then it's moving back into that Gandanta zone. And actually this time, instead of retrograding all the way through it and then having to move forward, it's like going direct in that Gandanta zone. So at the end of the retrograde, Mercury will, it's being Gandanta for a long time is what I'm trying to point out. And, what that means is this retrograde is a little extra poignant for making big changes spiritually, releasing spiritual knots. It's spending a little bit extra time. Like, it is common, like I was saying a moment ago, it's pretty common for Mercury to retrograde through the Gandanta zone. It's not that unusual. Like, I think it's already happened once this year. But what is uncommon about this particular Mercury retrograde is it's spending longer being Gandanta. And so Mercury also is frequently combust. And so that's another one that I think gets a little bit of fear in the astrology world. Like, oh, Mercury's combust. That means it's moving close to the sun. Mercury is close to the sun almost more often than it's not. It's typically in the same sign as the sun, like the overwhelming majority of the time. But combust means it's within a certain number of degrees of the sun. So it's very close. And so if you think about it, like if you can ever like see a planet, sometimes you can see Venus. And when it's like the evening star, and you can see it visually with your eyes. When it gets pretty close to the sun, within degrees, right, which is what we call being combust, you can't physically see it because the sun is overpowering it. So that's what being combust means. Basically, the effects of that planet are weakened because the sun is overpowering it, which is seen as a bad thing. But I try not to be fear-based really, with anything that I'm talking about. I don't want to scare you. I don't want to make you not live your life because of something astrologically, right? And so Mercury's frequently combust, but what we see with the combustion when Mercury's retrograde is that's like another section when we can pay a little extra attention, be a little extra careful, maybe double check ourselves a little bit extra. And so what I was getting at with that is like if we're zoomed way out, is like we might start experiencing issues with this Mercury retrograde as soon as the shadow period begins, which was July 16th. And then those issues might heat up a little bit more while Mercury is Gandanta, while it's actually retrograde. So that's like one step in. And then while there's a time where it is Gandanta and combust. And that period of time is when you just might want to be extra careful, or it's a good time to like really pay closer attention to choosing a new pattern that will serve you better. And so let's look into like what those patterns might be. And so FYI also, because I know the podcast is not really the right format for me to just be throwing a bunch of dates at you, I will send this out via email also. In that newsletter that I send on Friday, I have been just including my notes, which is what I used to do in the membership that's currently on. I used to just, with the sign by sign, I would just give you my notes. And so I have all of this in my notes. I have the exact dates that Mercury is retrograde, the exact degrees, the exact dates of the shadow period and times, the exact dates and times of combustion and Gandanta. So if you want all of that, just make sure you get my emails. But basically, just to give you an overview right now, is that period where Mercury will be retrograde, combust, and Gandanta. So kind of the peak of this is between August 17th and August 26th is when Mercury will be all three, retrograde, combust, and Gandanta. So that's what I would call like maybe the peak of this retrograde period. If like, I don't want to put it this way, but like maybe the worst part you could think of it as, or like where the most issues might present themselves, which the way I want to look at that, or that I hope to inspire you to look at that, is the period where you have the most opportunity to choose a new pattern that might serve you well. So let's talk about what those patterns might be. As I mentioned, Mercury's retrograding through Leo and Cancer. And so I don't actually want to talk too much about the signs. I would rather talk more specifically about the nakshatras, because as I've mentioned before, nakshatras are often, they're pretty much just like subsets of signs, basically. And so sometimes a nakshatra will span over two signs, like it'll be a little bit in one sign and a little bit in another, but both of these nakshatras where Mercury's retrograding are, one's entirely in Leo and one's entirely in Cancer. So instead of talking about all the qualities of Leo and all the qualities of Cancer and all the qualities of each nakshatra, I'd rather point out the specific qualities that would still be wrapped up in qualities of Leo and qualities of Cancer that these nakshatras are bringing up. So let's start with the first one, which is Magha. And so Magha is in Leo. It translates to the mighty one, or magnificent is another translation of Magha. And so we know Leo is the lion, right? Leo is the fire sign. The symbol for Magha is a royal throne, or I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but palanquin, I don't know. My mother-in-law told me that she can tell I'm just like a person that reads a lot, because I'll be saying stuff like completely wrong because I've only seen it written because I read a lot instead of hearing it said out loud, because I do more reading than anything else. So anyway, what that means though is, like, if you've ever seen those little the little chairs that the king or queen or prince or whatever rides in, and the people carry them, like I think in the Emperor's New Groove they had one of those. Sorry for the Disney reference, but when the royalty gets like carried by all the little, peons that carry them, multiple people carry this chair. That is a symbol of this nakshatra. Okay. And so what I always like to point out is that royalty, what makes them royalty is because they come from a bloodline, like it's family, it's lineage, right? That typically, in most cases, it's not really, the world's not really like run this way anymore, but when royalty was like how we got our government, and it's again, it's not really this way in most places anymore, but when that used to be the way things were done, especially like when astrology was being invented, right? That bloodline was royalty because they like won the wars against all the other bloodlines, basically, right? Like it was like there's like a fighting connotation, if that makes sense. And so it has to do with bloodline, with lineage, is what I'm trying to point out. So this nakshatra, Magha, has a really strong connection to lineage and to royalty, also in the sense of like the ruling class, if that makes sense. And the deity of Magha Nakshatra is Pitris, which is the fathers of humanity, aka ancestors. So if you want to think of it like in that sense, Magha also has a connection to ancestors in that sense. But if you think about royalty and like what even is royalty, is like it's a bloodline, which is ancestors. So Magha has a really strong connection to lineage and to ancestors, if that makes sense. The aim of life, the Purushartha of Magha, is Artha, or the pursuit of wealth. And so I'll just point out, because it really, really sums up the qualities of Magha, is Donald Trump has his ascendant and Mars in the nakshatra of Magha. And so if you just think about the qualities of Donald Trump, that's Magha. Like, he comes from a wealthy bloodline. He, as the former president of the United States, he has been in the ruling class, right? Like, he's very concerned with the pursuit of wealth, which is Artha, right? And yeah, and he's, it's interesting, actually, he's a Leo ascendant in both Western and Vedic astrology. So that helps, point out like the qualities of Magha, right? And so I'll say more in a second about what Mercury retrograding through that nakshatra might mean. But I also want to say, in a global sense, Donald Trump has Mercury retrograding on his ascendant, or will, pretty soon. As I'm recording this, it's not retrograde there yet. And the shadow period that we're in, actually, I believe as I'm recording this, so actually that's not true. As I'm recording this, Mercury is already in Magha. Mercury moved from Cancer to Leo last Friday, July 19th, which is, you could call that the peak of the Gandanta zone, right? At that moment when it changed signs, went from, 29 degrees and 59 minutes of Cancer to 0 degrees, 0 minutes of Leo, was when that CrowdStrike thing happened. It was like overnight of Thursday night into Friday morning. And that's right when Mercury moved signs, during this Mercury retrograde shadow period. And so as I'm recording this, Mercury is already in its shadow period on Donald Trump's ascendant. Just want to point that out. Let's continue talking about what that could mean. I'm taking a more individual approach this time. Sometimes for longer term transits, I take a more global predictive approach, but for this one, let's think about individually. And so you could apply that to thinking about Donald Trump has Mercury retrograding on his ascendant, or will here pretty soon. So anyway, once Mercury moves back to Cancer, which again, let me grab that date. Let me scroll up, which is August 21st. So the good majority of this retrograde is through the sign of Leo, but it will retrograde back into Cancer and stay in this Gandanta zone in the last pada of Ashlesha for the entire time that it's retrograding back into Cancer, and then has to move back forward through that section of the sky. And so Ashlesha Nakshatra is symbolized by a serpent. Its translation is coiling or entwining. And so what all do we know about the symbol of a serpent? So a snake. Snake has connections to Kundalini energy. So this nakshatra has a really strong vibe of like, Kundalini energy, which is like the spiritual awakening that is said that happens when you align your chakras, right? Like when all your chakras along your Sushumna Nadi, which is basically your spine, that channel of energy is opened up, and spiritual energy that's coiled at the base of your spine, like the translation of Ashlesha, coiling, is coiled at the base of your spine, waiting to be awakened when all of the blockages are removed, right? And then that energy awakens and moves up your spine. And so that's what we would call a Kundalini awakening or a spiritual awakening. And so that description really helps understand Ashlesha Nakshatra, which is a big vibe of Ashlesha Nakshatra is hidden information. And so if you think about it, like often Kundalini is like, it's kind of a cult, not, which is funny that I say that because it actually, like Yogi Bhajan and all that, whatever, I don't want to go there. Because Kundalini means something beyond that. But I mean OCCULT, occult. It's hidden. It's not like necessarily in the forefront of a lot of people's awareness. And it's also something that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around for a lot of folks. Which really, so it's mysterious, right? That's the word I'm looking for. Which is a vibe of Ashlesha Nakshatra. But I also want to point out that, so it's that mysterious vibe, but in a practical sense, like, had you heard of CrowdStrike before, this incident happened, because I hadn't. And so maybe you work in IT, or like you're a person who's like more plugged into that kind of stuff. But I think the great majority of people hadn't heard of it and didn't realize how much this thing that's kind of hidden really impacts our day-to-day life. And so that's kind of the same vibe with Kundalini energy, is like, so I'm like a yoga teacher, so I know all about it, like I get it. But when I was first learning, when I was in my first yoga teacher training, it was hard for me to wrap my head around what Kundalini rising like meant. But it's also like, it's this spiritual energy, and I think it's something that can be tapped into, like it's more prevalent than it might seem, because it's hard to wrap our minds around. And so that's kind of similar with IT, right? Like, it might be kind of hard for the average person who's not really plugged into that to wrap their mind around it, but it is always there, and it is always like doing its thing, even if your brain isn't like understanding that, right? Does that make sense? Hopefully that parallel kind of makes sense. So some other considerations about Ashlesha Nakshatra and this snake thing, this snake symbolism that I want to pick apart a little bit more before I recap with the overall energies and yoga practices and journal prompts is, so the deity, I didn't mention this before, the deity of Ashlesha is Nagas, which is the serpent deities of wisdom. And so basically that just adds more into the sorry, somebody joined the waiting room and it like totally distracted me, which is a Mercury retrograde thing. Anyway, I'll say more about that in the yoga practices, journal prompts, that section. It's actually in my notes to address that. So anyway, the snake vibe, another thing about the snake is, so it's mysterious. It's a little bit sus, right? Like we're like, oh, we're all a little bit suspicious of snakes, but they're actually like really beneficial to the environment. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of vibe. There's also this wrapped up in snake mythology is snakes are poisonous, or like, you ever heard of like snake in the grass, that there's like maybe some deception happening, but that's really like an actual snake, like not true, you know, but it's part of how they're perceived. So that's a vibe of Ashlesha Nakshatra, but it also has connections to, because of that Nagas, that's what I got off track before, the serpent deities of wisdom, is there's this connection to intuition, like third eye, insight, this like channeling wisdom, right? And because Kundalini, like, it's at the base of the spine, there's a connection to sexuality. And, like letting that energy kind of permeate or not be so hidden, because that can be kind of hidden too, or some people let it be more forefront part of their identity. So that's Ashlesha. And so Mercury retrograde in general, as I was mentioning before, let's like move into the recap. Mercury retrograde, we often hear, is a time to review, to re-examine, reorganize, recap. Here I am recapping, right? It's a time to reevaluate or reimagine, like anything that you can come up with that starts with that RE prefix. It's like redo, right? That kind of stuff. And so that's because of this nature of, right, like the retrograde. What happens is it has, the planet moves forward through a section of the sky. It then moves backwards. It like retraces its steps through that same section of sky. And then it has to go forward again through. So it's like redoing that area of the sky. It's like a do-over. And so ideally, if we're granted the opportunity for a do-over, we should try to do better, right? Like that's what we should strive for. And so you apply that, what we know about Mercury retrograde in general, to the sections of the sky that it's retrograding through, which are what I just described, Magha, that section of Leo, and Ashlesha, that section of Cancer. And so it is a time in general, especially with this Gandanta thing happening, to like release, to notice what issues are presenting themselves, and to release perhaps or just like reimagine anything around transformation and healing, right? Because that's Ashlesha, that snakes like shed their skin, right? So can you like, what do you need to shed to transform and to heal and to come out the other side more beautiful? And then also, what I didn't mention before is, so Magha is ruled by Ketu, which is the body of a snake without a head, right? In Vedic mythology. And it is also represents our past lives. So Magha already has that connection to lineage, to ancestry, right? That I was mentioning. And so in a lot of ways, that's how I kind of personally conceptualize what past lives means. It's like our ancestry and our lineage and that kind of stuff, and how those things that happened before we like existed impacts our karma, or like the hand we've been dealt in this lifetime, right? And that's kind of like what we're coming into this world with, is like our lineage and stuff. And then so that snake symbolism of Ashlesha also brings that connection to Rahu and Ketu, which are our past life karma and our this life karma, right? So that's basically the whole vibe of the whole time, is like what's coming up around your lineage healing, around your like past life karma. And so that's the way I conceptualize that, is lineage and ancestry. So that's kind of like generational healing. And so in a second, I have more to say about like a practical approach to generational healing. And so then it's also a big theme of this particular Mercury retrograde is that hidden energy, that Kundalini vibe that I was describing. And so like IT is kind of like, especially because Mercury has this connection to travel, to tech, to communication, to the nervous system, that kind of thing, is like that. That CrowdStrike example is like such a perfect example of this Mercury retrograde's vibe. It's like this thing that's like lurking right under the surface, but is so prominent and impacts our life in such a big way, is getting affected, and issues are kind of presenting themselves, and we're having to realize like, oh, that's a pretty major flaw if just a routine software update could like have this big of an impact on the world. And so that's something that hopefully we collectively, because like I'm not in IT, like I don't have any control over that personally, but hopefully that's something that we can collectively address, because it's been brought to our attention by this Mercury retrograde. So that's on a collective sense. And then on a more individual sense, maybe you consider, lineage healing. And so let's talk about it. For these, I don't always do this for new and full moons, but for longer term things or like monthly outlooks, I'll usually tell you what it's a good time for and a bad time for. So this Mercury retrograde is a good time for therapy. It is a good time for clearing the hidden information from your psyche. And so if you're in a relationship, it's a really good time too for couples therapy. Because I neglected to mention this earlier, but it's in the notes that you'll get if you're on my email list. Venus will be tracking really close the whole time. And so that's one factor. But another factor is exploring things like internal family systems, IFS, or attachment theory could be a good thing to, because attachment theory, that's something you get from your caregivers, right? Like, is your attachment style, and it's not fixed or static. Like, you can change it, you can practice, but this is the kind of thing, it has to be practiced in relationship. And so in relationship, in couples therapy, in individual therapy, it's a good time to examine that hidden stuff, right, in your psyche, which is kind of what I mean by generational healing. This Mercury retrograde is a really good time for generational healing. And so looking at your attachment styles, your, internal family systems, that kind of stuff, like what did you really get from your family, right? And especially in terms of relationship, in terms of love, because Cancer also is like the heart, right? It's your sense of home. And if there was some disruption there, you might be one of those people that experiences this thing where you feel like home is something that you long for that like doesn't exist anymore. And I'm here to tell you that if you do feel that way, you can cultivate an inner sense of home without, even if you have some kind of home that you can't go back to, you can also cultivate that feeling of home within yourself. And therapy would be a good place to work on that, right? To work on your inner sense of peace and comfort that you get from you. Right. And so then it's also just in general, Mercury retrograde is a good time for clearing and decluttering. As always, like what hidden information is taking up space in your life, whether that's physically, mentally, or digitally. And then lastly, it's a good time for being intentional, because a couple days after Mercury goes retrograde in Cancer, a couple days after it goes retrograde it'll still be in Leo, but it finishes its retrograde in the Skandanta zone in Cancer, as I've been talking about. There's a new moon in Cancer. So the whole time, can you kind of be intentional about all this and like set your intentions of how you want to step forward from the retrograde? I'll say more on a new moon episode for Cancer. And so it's a bad time for being dysregulated when issues come up, because Mercury is all about the nervous system. It rules over the nervous system. And so the issues are going to happen. And if you get like super mad about it or super dysregulated and you blow your lid kind of thing, that doesn't help, right? And so what does help is learning to be regulated and keeping yourself from getting into this huge like fight or flight state. And that's what yoga can help with. I'll say more about that in just a second. It's also a bad time for judging yourself or others for things like typos or stumbling over words. So that's like when I said earlier, I was like, I had a brain fart. And that's what it was literally in my notes to like, it's okay. Like I find myself stumbling over my words, being less articulate and things when we're in the shadow period or in Mercury retrograde. It's just part of it. And last week it took me 3 takes to do the podcast. Normally I do it in 1 take. So I was a little bit nervous this week. I'm recording this live. And so you're getting this in 1 take. It's also a bad time for things like tight layovers, because Mercury retrograde just throws things off. It does. And so, and now that if you study astrology, you know this, and you can just not plan any sketchy layovers or things like that in your travel. Give yourself extra space, give yourself extra time, because if you know you're going to, know you're going to be late or know you're going to miss your plane, that's a lot more dysregulating, because that's a valid threat, right? To put you in fight or flight mode. But if you're like, I got time, I can be chill about it because you planned your life intentionally that way because you knew Mercury was retrograde. Maybe you're new to this. Maybe next time you plan better. That's just a thing for Mercury retrograde. And I'm not one to say don't travel at all. I'm one to say just give yourself extra space in your itinerary so you don't have to get pissed off at the poor desk agent when a tech glitch makes the system go down, right? I'm not saying any of you would do that, but I've been in airports before. People do. So your yoga practices, sacral chakra work, because of that, especially while Mercury's moving through Cancer, flowing movements. There's a specific practice that's sometimes called Shiva squat or Kundalini's descent. I'm working that into my flow classes this week. That's going to be, I'll see if I can create a resource around that, because we're already pretty far in. I don't want to say any more about that. It's also a good time or your yoga practices include Pitta balancing, because we are at this Skandanta zone in Pitta season between fire and water. Just notice, is fire out of balance for you? Is water out of balance for you? Is it one or the other? Can you kind of check in with those couple elements and see how they're showing up in your life? Are you experiencing things like burnout or Pitta imbalance? This Mercury retrograde might kind of bring them to the forefront a little bit more. So maybe look into Pitta balancing techniques. It's also a good time for bilateral stimulation, which means moving. It's like rubbing your belly and patting your head, right? Like doing different things with the different sides of your body is a good brain challenge, right? And Mercury retrograde, Mercury in general is like the brain and the nervous system. And so if you're experiencing those challenges, like stumbling over your words and having brain farts and poor memory, bilateral stimulation, moving the sides of your body differently, can help. It's also a good time for heart opening and nervous system regulation. Nervous system regulation includes especially using your breath, like extending your exhales to bring yourself out of that fight or flight state. And yoga is really good at that, really good for that. There's a lot of different ways to approach that. And that's all I'm going to say about it at this point in the episode. So your journal prompts. 1, what ancestral patterns or beliefs have influenced my current life choices? What gifts do I want to carry from my lineage? And so think of these in terms of qualities, ways of being, or beliefs. And so first, I just want you to think about the positives. Like, what are some good things that you've gotten from your lineage or your ancestral patterns and beliefs from, like, the hand you've been dealt in life, like that kind of thing. And so then number 2 is, in what ways were my ancestors or caregivers doing the best they could with the resources or awareness they had available? So maybe you acknowledge the bad, right? Like, acknowledge the ways that had an impact on you. Like, maybe you can acknowledge, yes, they were doing the best they could with what they had, but also acknowledge really and truly the impact that had on you. And then you can consider, are there ways that you could do better, that you are doing better, or that you could do better? And what steps could you implement during this Mercury retrograde to heal yourself in order to heal your lineage, to do better because you have maybe more awareness than your caregivers or ancestors did? And then number 3, what hidden truths about myself am I not speaking or living out? So maybe you investigate why. There could be a valid fear for like psychological safety, but you might also look into some of Brene Brown's work around fitting in versus belonging. So if you are going with a status quo that feels like it goes against your truth, this Mercury retrograde might really bring issues around that. And so maybe you investigate if you've been trying to fit in and silencing parts of yourself to fit in rather than truly belonging in a place that you can be fully expressed as yourself. So with that, in what small ways can I start to integrate my truths in a more forward-facing or like Leo style, like loud and proud, like we know Leo to be? So that's it. That's your journal prompts, your yoga practices. I'm going to go ahead and cut off the recording so I can jump into Q&A with these folks that are here live. And if you want to come live next week, make sure you watch out for my email on Friday. So until then, keep your feet on the ground, your head in the stars, and stay in the light.